Well, good afternoon. I'm glad that you have joined me today on this Wednesday afternoon. It's June 7th, 3 p.m. here in the Eastern United States. So glad that you've joined me. If you've spent your life feeling busy, but you're not sure that you're headed in the right direction, you are in the right place. If you feel like you've been putting in a lot of effort and working, but you're fulfilling somebody else's dream, you are in the right place. And if you feel like you've been called to be more of who you are, but you want help just staying on the right track, you're in the right place. Again, thank you so much for joining me. This is the Align Your Purpose in Work and Life workshop. And this is the webinar. We've got two exercises to share with you today. Both of them work together to help you align the purpose that you have in life with both your work life and your life. So again, thanks for joining me today. If it's okay with you, I'd just like to jump right into the material. So sometimes we have a hard time making decisions just because we haven't yet figured out what's truly important to us. I don't just mean what's important to us in the moment, but more broadly, what's most valuable to us in life overall. I mean, on one hand, we could probably rattle off a whole list of things that we like to think are important, um, or what we think should be important. But of all the important things in life, what is it that you truly value the most? And how does that help you stay on track? That's what this workshop is going to help you find out. Because when you are able to clearly articulate what it is that you most value, when you can do that, you can make better decisions. And you can arm yourself with the tools that help you form and maintain positive habits and keep the motivation that you know that you need to do and be the to do the things and to be the person that you feel called to be. So by the end of this exercise, you will have discovered your top few personal values, and you will have identified some of the decoy values that kind of get in your way and distract you from what's really most important. There are a couple of downloadable PDFs for this exercise. We're not going to fill them out in real time today. They are the kind of thing that you're going to want to sit down during a quiet time and think through them honestly. But you can download them here at northwayinsights.com/exercises. And you'll see two of those, two exercises on that page. The first is discovering personal values. And so you'll want to download that. And then the other is the life behavior map, and you'll want to download that one as well. And I'm going to put a link in the chat here just to make sure that you can get those downloaded. So I'll give you a few minutes to get them downloaded, save them someplace that you can get to them later. And feel free to open them up now if you want to. But I'll also be sharing that content in the webinar itself. So let me clean up some of this here. And keeps moving there. All right, so here's the first one that you'll see. And that is the discovering personal values. And I'll talk a little bit more while we're waiting for people to download those exercise files. We'll explore a little bit more about what we're looking for when we talk about values, because some of you might get a little nervous hearing me talk about how values are personal. You might be saying, well, right and wrong, they're right and wrong for everyone. We don't get to choose for ourselves what's right and what's wrong. And I'm not talking about personalized morals. This isn't about deciding what's right and wrong for each person, but we're talking about what naturally feels important and valuable to you. What is it that makes you say, this is something I feel like supporting? Or when this is true, it really lights me up. It excites me. It just makes me naturally want to participate. So it's not about what's good and what's right. It's about what's valuable. For example, some people may value predictability more than they value adventure. Other people may value adventure more than they value predictability. Neither one's right, neither one is wrong, but the value of one versus the other, it's personal. It's yours. So as you work through the exercises that we're going to go over, you might discover that you value things like achievement or beauty. Maybe you value generosity, or you value financial stability, or community, or uniqueness, curiosity, or understanding. Neither one of those is right or wrong, but you may resonate with one of them more than the other. Now, in my personal exercise, when I did this for myself, I was kind of surprised to discover that one of the values that showed up was silliness. It's something that I find important, I find valuable. And without the opportunity to just be silly sometimes, I start to notice that something in life is missing. Now, I rattled off quite a few different things that people might find valuable, but something that you're not going to find in our exercises is a list of potential values to choose from. And that's because the point of this exercise isn't for you to select values out of a list that somebody else came up with. It's for you to discover them for yourself. So now let's go ahead and look at the Discovering Personal Values exercise PDF. So I'm going to jump straight to page 2 here because the first part's just introduction and we've already talked about that. But page 2 is really where we just have an open-ended brainstorm. So as you go through this, and we're not going to do it right now, but as you go through it, use a pencil with an eraser. Find a time where you can spend a good 10 minutes at least alone in a place where you're not going to be interrupted. And during those 10 minutes, just write down whatever comes to mind as something that you value. I want to emphasize this is a brainstorm. It's not your final list. Nobody's going to check over this. Nobody's going to evaluate it or question you about it. Also, don't get caught up in second guessing or double checking to see, well, is this really valuable to me? I'm not sure. Or is this more valuable than something else? Or didn't I already write something like that? Don't worry about those things. Just let the thoughts flow onto the paper. When it comes to brainstorms, I subscribe to the peanut butter rule. And that is, it doesn't matter what the topic is. If peanut butter comes to mind, you write down peanut butter on the brainstorm. In this case, it doesn't matter if you don't like peanut butter. It doesn't even matter if you're allergic to peanuts. If peanut butter comes up, you just write down anything that comes up. You can change the list later. That's why you have an eraser. The important thing right now is just write down, not right now during the exercise, but as you're working through there, not right now during the webinar, but as you're working through the exercise, the important thing is to write down as much as you can think of in that 10 minutes. The next thing that you're going to see is a list of 10 questions. So that's the following pages there. I'm not going to go over every one of those 10 questions here on the webinar, but you can look through these as you go through your own exercise. But through these 10 questions, you're going to want to take 2 passes through them. The first time you go through this, you just want to answer the question as written. So in this case, for question 1, what would you want if you were guaranteed to get it and not lose it? For question 2, what would you try if you knew there were no consequences for failure? And we've got 10 different questions here that are shaped similarly. But in pass 1, as you go through this exercise, you're just going to want to answer the question with as much detail as you can, as if you are answering the question for somebody who doesn't know you very well. Just elaborate for a little bit on why would you want that thing? What is it about that thing that makes you want it? And then you go through all 10 questions just answering. When you're done answering the 10 questions, then you're going to make a second pass. Um, but even as you're answering the first question, you may find that you get stuck on one of them. It's like, I really don't even know. That's okay. You can skip it. You can move ahead, answer the other questions, come back to the harder ones later, but finish all of the ones in the first pass before you move on to the second pass, and take the time you need. This doesn't have to be something with a deadline. What's most important is that you can answer the questions in a way that is helpful for you. Then the second pass is when you're going to go back through to the top and look at the reflections. So, for example, for the first question, what would you want if you were guaranteed to get it? As you reflect on your answer, then think about, what would life be like if you had it? How would you know that you had it? What would you feel? That thing that you would notice in your life, there's probably a value there. Or in the second question, what would you try if you knew there were no consequences? If you look back at your answer, what would you gain if you succeeded? Well, whatever that thing is that you would gain, that's probably something you value. What would you lose if you faced the consequences of failing at it? Whatever it is that you would lose, there's probably something that you value. And so all of these 10 questions have similar reflections on them. As you're finished going through those reflections, then find the values that you discovered during those reflections, and then you'll add them to the brainstorm list on page 2. Now that you've filled up your brainstorm with as much as you can think of, now it's time to start noticing some of the patterns in all of the different things that you wrote down in that brainstorm. See if you can find ideas or groups of ideas that are related in some kind of a way. And then on page 7, after all the questions, now you'll start writing down themes. So, for example, you may notice that you found a common theme of stability, predictability, confidence, knowing, having time to prepare, maybe a phrase that showed up. And you notice that those are all kind of related. So go ahead and write them down on a single line on page 7 with slashes in between them. And that's one theme of something that you value. You might also notice that a single word can mean different things. So you might come across integrity with a theme of truth, authenticity, and being consistent. You might also have found integrity with the idea of wholeness or complete, or the phrase finish the job. So those are two different meanings to the word integrity, and you might have found both in your list. So we said before, don't worry if you about, did I already write this down? Because it's during this consolidation phase that you'll be able to identify the patterns and those recurring themes. And that's what you'll write down on page 7. And again, we're not worried about getting it right. Again, you're using a pencil with an eraser because you can always change this later on. Now, so far, you've just been writing things down without judging. We've been taking all the judgment off. Just write, just try, just put something there. You might literally still have peanut butter on your list just because it came to mind because you remembered us talking about it during this webinar. And you may not even like peanut butter. Now is when it's time to start evaluating things and taking that giant list that you have and whittling it down into something that's more of a manageable size. So for step 1, you're just going to classify each theme you have on page 7 into one of 3 different categories. So category 1 is your core values. These are the values that are so strong, they're so important to you that they feel like requirements. If you're ever living outside of these values, life just feels wrong and unfulfilling. And if you violate them long enough, then you may face shame, embarrassment, or even depression, literally. Most people are going to end up with really only about 3 to 5 values that they call core values. So set your bar pretty high before marking some theme as a core value. I talked earlier about silliness. That's one of my values. And as important as silliness is to me, it did not rise to the level of a core value. It's more like what I would call one of the chosen values. And this is the second tier. So these are values that you have adopted as your own. They feel personal to you. And you've learned to feel a sense of fulfillment when these values are present. And you do your best to live into these values. And that's the way silliness is for me. It's important. I really want to have a chance to exercise that value and to be silly from time to time. But it doesn't rise to the level of a core value. Then there's a third classification, and this is what we call the superficial shoulds. And there we go. So these values, they may be important to you, or they may be important to members of your family, members of your culture or environment. These are the values that are important to the people who are important to you. You're not necessarily opposed to these values, but they don't resonate with you personally like your core and your chosen values do. A lot of these are likely to show up, especially in that initial brainstorm when you're just trying to take everything and dump it down, because the things that you feel you should value often show up in that initial brainstorm. They can also creep up in the reflections on the other exercises that you did with answering those 10 questions. Because when you're trying to figure out, why was this important to me? Why did this stick out? Sometimes those impressions that we get from our culture, from our family, from the groups that we belong to, they have such a strong impression on our minds that they show up again as we're trying to identify why things are important to us. So you may find your superficial shoulds showing up as a result of either of those two steps. The thing about the superficial shoulds is that when you try too hard to live up to those values, you'll find yourself taking energy away from the chosen values and the core values, the things that are truly important and give you fulfillment. So you want to be careful not to invest so much energy trying to live up to your superficial shoulds that you cannot actually do the things that truly give you fulfillment. Now, as you're working through this list, you may find that you need to change your list or maybe group things together differently on page 7. And again, that's fine. That's why you're using a pencil with an eraser. You may also find on page 7 that you wrote down a lot of things that aren't really values at all. I mean, it was just a brainstorm. Like I said, you might still have peanut butter on there. When you come across those, feel free to just cross them out or erase them, or even just not having a classification next to them. That might be good enough for you. The last step in the values discovery is prioritization. So you've already identified a small handful of maybe 3 to 5 core values. Go ahead and put a star next to each of those themes that represent those 3 to 5 core values. Next, look at the things that you've identified as chosen values and think about which of those is really the most important to you, what collection of them. And then put a star next to the ones that are most important until you have somewhere around 7 to 10 total themes with stars next to them. So if you have only 3 core values, then find somewhere between 5 to 7 of the chosen values to identify as your personal values. If you've got 5 core values, then really no more than 5 of the chosen values. But you want to find that top 10 list or top 7 to 10 list of the themes of values that are truly most important to you. Now, it's not important. Don't get stuck here thinking, oh, I've got to figure out which one's one. Is this really going to be 4 or is this 5? You don't have to force rank them. It's not worth the effort. There's not a lot of value in force ranking them amongst themselves. But you do want to make sure that you're focusing on the top of your chosen values along with your core values to get a range of 7 to 10 total themes that you're working with. And this collection of themes, these are your personal values. And you're going to find your greatest fulfillment in life. And you're going to find your greatest motivation when the work that you're doing and the goals that you're pursuing are aligned with these values, with these top 7 to 10 total themes. Now, there's also a bonus. You can go farther than just this collection of 7 to 10. Just having the 7 to 10, tremendously valuable for you. But you can go one step further by taking that list of 7 to 10 and distilling it down to just 2 or 3 individual words that work together to encompass that entire set of core and chosen values. If you can do that, if you can find that 2 or 3 individual words, now you've given yourself a mental shorthand that you can use later as you think about your own motivation, as you think about prioritization, answering questions like, how do I evaluate these options? For example, my 2 words, when I took all of my core and chosen values together, the 2 words that really summarized them all was beauty and integrity. Now, each of those words independently has a whole wealth of meaning behind it. And combined, those 2 words and their larger meaning kind of envelops or umbrellas or encompasses everything that is housed within all 7 to 10 themes of my collective personal values. And so I can use those 2 words when I'm evaluating things. Well, how does this option, how does this opportunity represent beauty to you? How does it represent integrity? And by asking those 2 questions, it's a mental shorthand, like I said, that helps encompass the entire list of values. So that was really the first exercise of identifying the core, your personal core values. There is a second exercise that you looked at when we were on that on the download page. That second exercise is the life behavior map. And this one is a particularly interesting one because of how it helps you with motivation. What you saw in that first exercise are the characteristics, the themes, the values that really mean something to you. It's what you find valuable just because of that unique individual human being that you are. But one of the challenges that we often face in life is that we feel like the things that we do or the things that we're supposed to do somehow feel disconnected from those values that we identified. Either we're not able to invest enough of our time in those things that are valuable to us, or we can't seem to find the motivation to work on those things that we think are important for us to do. So this second exercise, it's a map to help you trace the specific things that you want to do in life to those values that most resonate with who you are at your core. So for this exercise, we're going to use the life behavior map. This is that second PDF, the life behavior map. And most of what's in the PDF, I'm actually going to be covering in this webinar. So what's not covered, what's really you're going to use is page 3 here. This is a blank chart, and we're going to talk more about that later. But this page here, page 3, this blank chart, is the part of the PDF that you're actually going to fill out here on the PDF. But you could just as easily use a blank sheet of paper or a computer to do that. But to help make things just a little bit less abstract, a little more concrete, I want to introduce you to a fictional friend, Finley. So for the sake of this exercise, let's imagine that Finley has these values. So Finley values family, friends, faith, fun, freedom, fairness, and future. Now, you'll probably remember that at the end of that previous exercise that we did, you probably ended up with a list of themes that were multiple words strung together with slashes between them. And that's what yours are probably going to look like. But this is just to make the example a little more fun, a little bit more interesting. And the first thing that you're going to do with this exercise looks an awful lot like what you did with the previous exercise. We start with just a free-flowing brainstorm. But in this case, you're going to brainstorm what it is that you do because of the things that you value. This is what I call your valued behaviors. So with the list of values that we saw in the previous slide, Finley might come up with a list of valued behaviors that look like this. So Finley says, I leave work at a reasonable time. I earn more money than I spend. I take vacations. I stay healthy. And I do work that helps others. Notice that each one of these statements is first person, present tense. Finley doesn't say, I want to leave work at a reasonable time. It's not, I will earn more money than I spend. It's not, one should take vacations. Now, Finley says, I do these things. Every one of these is worded in first person, present tense. So when you are brainstorming your own valued behaviors, you're going to want to do the same thing. Come up with first person, present tense statements. Now, once you have your own starter list of valued behaviors, the next thing you want to do is to check and see how well do those behaviors line up with the values that you said you had. And this valued behavior chart helps you visualize that. So here's what Finley came up with. So across the top, you'll put your 7 to 10 themes that you discovered from the previous exercise. And these are Finley's personal values. Then down the side, you're going to list the valued behaviors as you brainstorm them. Then for each of those valued behaviors, put an X in the column of each of the personal values that that behavior honors. Again, with this exercise, you're going to want to use a pencil with an eraser because you're probably going to refine this a number of times. But as you think through it, you may find that you need to combine a couple of different things to be more specific, or you may need to split them up. Or you may find that there's one behavior that really honors several different values, and that's a good thing. And you'll want to adjust what they honor. Or you may find that by reorganizing them, you can have fewer different values, fewer different behaviors that it takes fewer behaviors to model all of your values. But just keep brainstorming and adjusting until every value that you have is reflected by at least one behavior. That way you know of something that you can do to honor every value that you hold to. Just, don't worry about getting hung up on the details because you will refine this as you go. Now, we worded these as first person present tense statements. But you may look at these and you may find that you're not actually living out these things that you say you're doing. And that's fine. That's okay. It's okay for these to be aspirational statements. In later steps in this exercise, we're going to help you make them practical. But for here, nobody else is going to see this. I keep saying this again. Nobody's going to judge you. Nobody's going to look at this. Nobody's going to ask you to defend why does this statement line up with these values. The whole point here is to make sense that to make sure that this makes sense for you. And as you look at the list of valued behaviors, you'll probably look at that and go, wow, these are kind of hard to live up to. And we talked about being okay with being aspirational, but we don't want them to stay aspirational. We want to be able to work towards them, to actually living out these things that I say I do in order to support who I say I am. So the next step is really to start thinking about other things that you can do to support those valued behaviors that you say you want to embody. So this right here is an excerpt from the next stage of Finley's exercise. Now, Finley has focused specifically on the idea of leadership at work with this little excerpt of the diagram. And you may decide that you want to limit this part of the exercise to just one area of your life. Or you may say, hey, let me do the whole thing. Let me just map out my entire life. Or you may find separate individual maps that you need to put together for different areas of your life. There's no right way or wrong way to do this. Whatever way works for you, do it that way. But you're going to pull out a separate piece of paper, or you may find that a drawing app on the computer works, or you may find that a whiteboard works for you. Whatever it is that works for you, the idea is first to write down your valued behaviors and put them in boxes. If you're using a pen and paper or a computer, you can use thick lines for those. Then start thinking of other things that you can do to support the valued behaviors. Put those things in boxes with thin lines, or maybe different colored sticky notes if you're just kind of pasting things on a whiteboard or something. But again, you want to use first person present tense sentences, even if you're not yet doing those things. Now, as you think about these supporting behaviors, you're probably going to find three general different kinds. So you may find behaviors that are examples of your valued behaviors. You may find prerequisites to your valued behaviors, or you may find contributors to your valued behaviors. So, for example, Finley says, I help my team succeed. And that would be an example of I do work that helps others. I stay focused at work may be a prerequisite to I leave work at a reasonable time. I exceed expectations at work may be a contributor to earning more money than I spend. So you'll have several different types of support that one type of behavior can give to another. But as you identify them, draw arrows that show how one behavior supports another. These show I call these the arrows of influence that show what direction, the flow of influence that shows how one behavior influences another. Now, you may have noticed even in these examples that those initial supporting behaviors might still feel a little too broad to be helpful. And as you're putting yours together, your initial supporting behaviors may also be too broad. And that's fine. When you discover that, just keep asking yourself, well, in order to live up to these behaviors, what else do I need to do consistently? And you might find that you end up with a diagram that looks more like this. So the behaviors now are becoming more specific and more detailed, but we still don't yet have any measures of success associated with them, at least not yet. So I may say, I make reasonable commitments. but I don't have any detail here to tell me, what does that mean? How do I know whether I'm making reasonable commitments? Those measures will come later. So be ready for that. But in the meantime, one of the things that I want you to think about as you're putting this map together, this is the time where you'll want to make sure that any external expectations are covered. So this is how you connect those things that you feel you should be doing to the things that you personally value. For example, Finley included, I meet my OKRs and KPIs. That's one of the supporting behaviors in this map, because meeting the objectives and key results and the key performance indicators is a prerequisite to exceeding expectations at work. And exceeding expectations at work helps Finley earn more money than I spend. And earning more money than I spend fuels Finley's personal values of freedom and future, which is what we saw on the value behavior chart. But if you get to this chart and you have this behavior that you think you're supposed to be doing, and you just can't figure out how to connect it to one of those valued behaviors, then it might be time to ask yourself, is there a value that I missed? When I did that first exercise, is there something else that I value that makes this kind of activity important and valuable to me? And if not, if there is nothing in the values, if you cannot find a way to take that expected behavior and map it to something that you value, then the next question to ask is, should I really be doing this? Is this, whatever this expectation is that the best use of my energy? And it might be time to maybe change the nature of the expectation, maybe clarify the expectation. It may be time to find a way to get out of that expectation and find a way to be able to commit yourself to putting your time and energy into the behaviors that actually support the things that are valuable to you, because those are the things that you're going to be able to stay committed to, stay motivated to. And going through that question, it's part of the value of this exercise. The value here is not just in having this completed map. Well, there is value there in being able to see and visualize how one behavior supports things that you value. But a lot of the value here is just in the process of what you learn and discover about yourself as you're working through creating the diagram in the first place. Now, we mentioned earlier here that nothing is really measurable yet. So these reasonable commitments, we don't yet know how to determine, are they measurable? Well, the next step that we want to go through is to add the measurable goals. And really, we have two different kinds of measurable goals here. First are your habit goals. You may call these action goals. Now, these are the leading indicator goals that you can achieve just by choosing to take specific actions. It should be easy for you to know whether you did the action or performed that habit. For example, I may have a habit goal that says, I exercise 20 minutes per day, 4 days per week. If I don't meet that habit goal, it's simply because I didn't choose to. There was some day or some combination of days in a week where I didn't choose to exercise. The other kind of goal is an outcome goal. So this is an achievement goal. It's a lagging indicator goal that's really a byproduct of your consistency over time with the habit or its associated behavior. So measuring yourself against the outcome goal, it lets you know how well or to what degree you have been faithful to the behavior that's tied to that goal. For example, if I look at a health-related outcome goal, one might be my BMI or my body mass index, I think, my BMI stays between 24 and 26. That's not something I can do just by choosing to do it. If I fail to meet that, it's not because I didn't choose for my BMI to be in that range, but it's an outcome goal. It's a result of other lifestyle choices or other factors. So whether I'm meeting my outcome goal is really a reflection of the degree to which I was faithful with the other behaviors. And so you're going to want to add both your habit and outcome goals to your map. Here's Finley's map with some concrete habit and outcome goals added in. So your outcome goals, you'll add in ovals with a thick or bold outline, and your habit goals in ovals with thinner outlines. And then you draw your arrows from the habits to the behaviors that they support, and from those behaviors to the outcomes that you expect to see from them. It's important to be strategic with these goals. It's entirely possible to fill up your map with so many of them that it becomes overwhelming. Not just overwhelming in that the map looks cluttered, but also when you have too many goals to track, your attention starts to get diluted and you really don't have the energy and attention to meet the goals that are most important. So you really want to focus on just having the most important habit and outcome goals included on your map. You may find that sometimes a valued behavior only has habit goals and doesn't have any outcome goals. Or you may find one that only has outcome goals with no habit goals. You may even find that it has more than one habit goal or more than one outcome goal. That's okay. Whatever makes sense to you, make this exercise work for you. But once you have your own version of this map in front of you, now you can see visually in a way that's motivating how the habits that you want to adopt eventually support the valued behaviors that you want to live out in your life, and then how those tie to the personal values that you've already discovered are the most important things to you. And often all it takes is a reminder of that value that you're going to get out of something to give you that motivation to follow through on the habits and the behaviors. And your map is not going to be perfect when you first work on this. Your first time through this exercise, it's going to be hard, and that's expected. But plan to revisit it periodically. You may look at it, and after a while, you discover, you know what, I'm not meeting those outcome goals, even though I think I'm being faithful with the habits and the behaviors that were supposed to support them. You might discover that you need to find different habits or different supporting behaviors in order to reach those desired outcomes. As you're working through this and reflecting on it, you may discover that there are new supporting behaviors that you didn't realize you need to add. Or you may find that some of those habit goals that you put on your map, they're draining your energy. They're taking energy and attention away from some of the behaviors that you really think are more important. As you go through this, when you discover something needs changing, change it. Putting something on that map doesn't mean it has to stay that way. The key is just get started. Put something there. Get it wrong. That's fine, but get started. And finally, I've said this many, many times, make the exercise your own. Nobody else even has to see it. Nobody's going to evaluate your work or criticize you on your decisions. And when you connect your behaviors to those values that you personally find motivating, then you're going to find that motivation to stick with those habits and make those behaviors possible. And if you want to have more support to help you align your work with the rest of your life, or if you're looking for help to succeed as you kind of level up, either in a formal management role or in an informal leadership role, a professional one-on-one coaching engagement just might be what you're looking for. And I would love to talk with you personally. You can apply to a one-on-one alignment or advancement coaching at no charge. You can apply at no charge with no obligation. If you go to northwayinsights.com/apply, fill out that information. And if it looks like you're a good fit for my coaching, I'll reach out so we can set up a complimentary call. And even if it doesn't look like you're a good fit for the kind of coaching I do, I'll still reach out and offer you some resources that will help you wherever it is that you are. Either way, you win. Again, thank you so much for attending this live webinar or for watching the recording afterwards. If you registered ahead of time, then I'll be sending you a link to the recording. Feel free to share that with others who are looking to align their purpose with their work and their life. But first and foremost, go out, get started, work on your own life behavior map, and find the motivation that you need to become the person that you were meant to be. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here before we open this up for Q&A, and then we'll get to questions and answers. But thank you for joining the webinar or for watching the recording.